My guest on today's show is Jim Pyle. Jim describes himself as a Midwest boy raised in SoCal, and he's lived coast to coast thanks to vagabond parents, the U.S. Army, and a myriad of jobs. At age 71, Jim lives in Greater D.C. with his wife, Deborah, and the last 2 of 5 kids who are back to college this fall. He has acted, authored, invented, preached, sold, trained, and hopes to continue all of those for years to come. He's an actively retired U.S. Army interrogator, interrogator trainer, author, inventor, and consultant to all things communication. Without further ado, Jim Pyle. Jim, what do you got?
Yes, sir. That live event was something else.
It was pretty fantastic. I'm glad I did not procrastinate and end up not going.
Absolutely. I had a head-on collision with the rest of my life. That really energized me for another year or two to come. I haven't smiled so much. I haven't had as much fun with people in years.
Yeah, I felt similarly. I'm curious what about it. Well, before we jump into that, let me backtrack real quick and let's provide some context for the audience.
Okay.
You and I met. The little booklet that we held up was just a notebook that was passed out at an event where you and I met. The Behavior Panel Live a couple weeks ago in Las Vegas. And so everyone in the audience knows I had not met Jim before, did not know who you were. And frankly, I still don't know a lot about you. I'm looking forward to getting to know you. But the guys on the behavior panel, someone asked a question from the crowd, which was, if you could add one person to the behavior panel, who would it be? And they all pointed at you and they said your name, which made me curious. I wanted to meet you, and here we are. So give us a little bit of background on yourself and then how you got to know the guys at the behavior panel, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, okay. Of course, James Pyle is my name that was given to me back in 5 years before rock and roll music, back on the 14th of September, 1950. And ever since then, I've been coming along as a salesman. I was a preacher at one time. I've done radio, broadcasting and sales. Joined the U.S. Army back in 1984 as an interrogator for 20 years, interrogator training. Like Greg Hartley, I supported the resistance to interrogation training at Camp McCall, strategic debriefer, trained strategic debriefing at Fort Huachuca. And then once I got out of the Army in 2004, I continued to train soldiers and special ops folks all over the country in intelligence collection, in communications, in different avenues of communication and management of information, and still to this day. And now I've begun to consolidate much of what I've done to maybe take it out to a different audience.
Okay. So your company, Communication Codex, is the main focus working with folks like you described, like the military and intelligence agencies?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
And like I say, I want to bring it out to a bigger spectrum. It's a very tight beam of light. Interrogation is, debriefing is, and yet the questioning sequence and the elicitation sequence of all of that is very well adapted to salespeople, to first responders, to medical professionals who need accurate information quickly, timely. And so with that, I've taken that small beam of light and put it through a prism, and that spectrum opens up to salespeople and all the like, I think, to understand rapport, understand body language, understand questioning, to understand elicitation, and closing the sale, getting the information, making it all happen.
Yeah. So one of the things that fascinated me when we spoke was you mentioned a little bit of that when we spoke at the event, And the whole reason I was at the event is my main focus for my business is developing and delivering training programs primarily in communication skills, also within a very narrow audience. Mine's very different than yours, though. Mine is accounting and finance professionals. Because similar to you, I kind of went with the club that I was in, right? So I used to be an accounting and finance professional. And so when I started teaching those skills, they were the skills that I felt like I lacked the most. And then when I started improving on them, I started to realize that they seemed to move the needle more for me than the technical skills did. And so when I discovered the behavior panel guys, I saw what you're saying in what they were putting out in their content, which was they were taking all those lessons learned from a specific context and putting it out there to a broader audience and finding a lot of success with people going, hey, I want to learn about that.
Sure.
So you mentioned something, you used the word elicitation, which is something that I had not heard a whole lot until I started listening to the behavior panel guys. Could you share with us, tell us a little bit about what elicitation is and how you have used that in communication?
Well, first off, if I were to ask you a question like, John, how much money do you make a year? That's a very bold and direct and personal and really none of my business question. And your first response is, why is he asking that? I don't think I want to answer that. I'm not interested in talking to you about that. So questions really put people on the defensive right away. And so I taught questioning for probably 30 years, but I try to avoid questions at all opportunities until I need them. And so I usually depend and fall back to and employ exclusively elicitation. And so by that, I will talk to you, become conversational with you, and provoke you, prompt you, poke you to talk to me about things that you would be uncomfortable talking to people about until you had rapport or had a reason to talk to me about those. So elicitation really is a conversation that starts without a question. Instead of saying, well, what do you think about this weather today? I said, man, it's a hot day out today, isn't it? And then you respond, you have something to say. And then if you don't say anything, maybe I don't talk to you anymore because I've got other people I can talk to. I talk to everybody that's anybody, anywhere. And my daughters would say, Dad, you have to talk to everybody? I said, yeah. Because in my mind, I have this question. What do you know that I don't know that I'd never know if I didn't ask or talk to you? Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got something to talk about. So I engage them everywhere.
So you mentioned a question that you asked me when we were seated at the same table one morning at the event, which is that question that you started with. What is something that you know that I don't know that I wouldn't know if I didn't ask?
Yeah.
And it stumped me for a second because nobody's ever asked me that question before. And it actually made me think. It did what I've heard other people refer to as like a pattern interrupt. It kind of took me out of, I was expecting like the usual, how are you doing? Good morning, kind of something that you could answer reflexively. And that question was not something I could answer reflexively. And it actually made me stop and think. And I think I gave you an answer like, I don't know, or I'm not even sure what I answered. Do you remember what I answered?
Oh, I've been blessed with a good forgetter. I'm sure I don't remember. But I do remember that you looked at me and there was a connection of interest, I think.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. So I've used that question with other people, and I found I am learning that if I'm going to use that question, I need to slow down when I say it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I've been told I'm a natural fast talker. I've actually I look back at some of my recordings to kind of as an, what do you call it in the military, an AAR, after action review?
Yeah, after action review. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I'll watch myself back and
they call it a hot wash.
A hot wash?
Yeah.
In sales, when I used to be a financial advisor, we stole the appointment autopsy was the language that Tom Hopkins used to teach, right? Mm-hmm. So we take the new guy after the appointment, go grab a cup of coffee. What went well, what didn't go well. Same type of thing, right? Sure. And I've noticed that I'm a natural fast talker, and then that phrase to me seems like it automatically takes people off guard. So I'm starting to try to train myself when I use it, speak slowly, try to be real clear with my enunciation. But that wouldn't fall into elicitation, right? Because that's actually asking a question.
Yeah, that's what's in my mind when I'm talking to you, because I want to find out what you know. I want to know who you are. You have a background, you have an experience, and maybe I need to have that experience and that background explained to me or exposed to me, because that might make me a better person, might make me a smarter person, might make me more functional in doing what I do. So I'm a composite. This is everything that I talk about is not just Jim Pyle thought of this. It's the people that taught me around. And just like the behavior panel, they gave me some credit that maybe it's not due, but I have influenced them in the past, but they pulled me up to the present. A lot of the stuff I've done in the past is timed and maybe a little dusty, but they brought me up to the present. And now I have reasons and understand why I do what I do, how I do, why it's effective. When I was doing it years ago, I had no clue. I just knew it worked. You mentioned the autopsy. It takes me back to Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Southern California. Great cemetery, probably the finest privately owned cemetery in the country. And I used to sell cemetery property there. And that was before I joined the military back in that was those years were 79 to 81. And I sold cemetery property, something that everybody needs, nobody wants. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to spend money on it. They'd rather buy a boat, a car, a house than, a little bit of land in the city of the dead. But it was a tough sale. But I made some success, and they made me a field sales trainer to take people from the sales school out in the field and make them successful. And if they were successful, it's to their credit. If they failed, it wasn't my fault. But Bob Balker came down to me as a new salesperson, and the folks at the schoolhouse said they didn't think he was going to make it. And so I took him out. He sold, and he took my job when I left Southern California and became a field sales trainer. And then Bob Balker, 3 years later, went to the schoolhouse and taught every salesperson at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, and they have thousands, every salesperson for the next 22 years.
Wow.
I have a legacy with Forest Lawn Memorial Park in that he and I worked together, and he continued to work there and train every salesperson. So I think that maybe he learned some things from me.
So I'm curious. So you've done some of the old school training. I'm guessing Tom Hopkins and some of those guys were, I think the first sales training book that I had was a Tom Hopkins book, and actually went to one of his live trainings it was in the 90s. He was already, I think, kind of semi-retired at that point, kind of a legend. But some of the sales training I've heard in more recent days, I hear a lot of people talk about how old-fashioned selling was about getting yes momentum, trying to ask yes questions, getting people in that pattern of saying yes. And that now a lot of sales training is teaching people to actually reverse it and ask questions that are actually, they're looking for a yes, but they phrase it so that the person says no, because we're so conditioned that we're seeing it coming. Have you seen that?
Yes, absolutely. I watch sales people and I listen to sales pitches. And one of the things about not getting to the no, instead of getting to yes, getting to the no is to get the problem out of the way. Bring up the objection before the end when they say, no, I'm not interested anymore. I don't have enough money. Find that out along the way by making opportunities for them to object or them to raise up a reason why not. And then you address that then instead of waiting to the end, but you got to do that hard, arm wrestling kind of thing. So there's getting to yes, getting to no. And I don't think I knew any of that. I just had some ability to go into a person's home who they didn't know me. They let me in, and I told them the story of Forest Lawn and my experience, and they trusted me. People will not give you two things until they trust you: information or money. Until they trust you, you're not getting any of that. And so with that, I just made it so people would trust me with their money, with their family, their legacy at Forest Lawn. And so that, I don't think I learned too much of that in a book, but I look back and now I know why it works and why it worked. And I really enjoyed that work. I enjoyed that time. But I had a wife and 3 children. And in sales, if you're not making a lot of sales all the time, you're not making a real living.
Yeah.
So then I came back to the Midwest, managed some cemeteries, did some radio work before then I joined the Army in 1984.
So so to me, it seems actually not that disparate to go from sales to what you were doing in interrogation. But I wonder if to other people, it seems like such a natural progression. What did you see? Well, first of all, why the Army? What drew you to the military?
Well, okay, going back further, I had done a lot of work, a lot of jobs, and none of them turned into a career. I had Army family who, for those reasons, is why I didn't join the Army, because maybe they reflected a part of the Army that I thought they were all like that. I didn't care for that. But when I found out that the Army could be a career, when I raised my hand for the first time in 1984, I said, this is going to be for 20 years. And it was. Wow. And it was the first time that I had a lot of stability. I had lots of support for the family, and I had lots of opportunity with the job. Interrogation is sales. It's just sales. And I think that's what I brought to the Army at an older person. I was 33 when I joined the Army. Older guy. I had experience. I had sales experience. I've done a lot of things that I brought street smarts to it. And that's why I think the Army identified me early to send me to the schoolhouse to teach interrogation, because it really is just sales. To get somebody to believe you, trust you, and tell you things that they've been told never to tell anybody for fear of death. And so they have to be comfortable with you. They have to believe you. They have to trust you. And sometimes we have to maybe make it a darker circumstance than what it is, to give them a little beam of light to want to look to. But with that, you can lead a horse to water. Finish that phrase.
Can't make them drink.
Okay. So what do? You make them thirsty.
Narrows options. Make them thirsty. That makes sense. Yeah.
You make them thirsty, and they'll drink all by themselves. It's so much. I didn't sell cemetery. People bought it from me because I made it available to them, and I made them want to have it. And so they really just bought it from me. I didn't sell it to them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think the best salespeople I've ever seen, I think the reason I didn't stay in sales as a career was because I think I approached it too much like from an academic perspective. Like, give me a book, teach me the steps, right? Mm-hmm. And the best salespeople that I knew, and I'm thinking of a guy right now he stayed in sales from the first day that I met him over 20 years ago, and he never took an academic approach. It sounds like he learned like you did. He was naturally good with people. He was curious. Mm-hmm. And he just had this intuition about how to talk to people and the right questions to ask them to just kind of get them to come to the conclusion themselves that, it sounds like something I need. Tell me more, type of thing. Mm-hmm.
The curiosity, you use the word curiosity. If you and I could teach curiosity, we wouldn't have to have any methodology at all, because curiosity really drives information exchange. Curiosity really does make people talk and communicate. One of the most wonderful books I ever read, and it's not a how-to book. It's not a book about this technique, that technique, but it told me I have a twin brother from a different mother somewhere in the world, and it's written by Brian Grazer. You may know him in cahoots with Ron Howard, making movies. Yeah. His book, A Curious Mind. When I read that, my whole spirit just came alive, because he talks about curiosity conversations. I always talked about discovery conversations. It's the same thing. And that book was a wonderful book for me to really explore my curiosity that is natural. And so I recommend that book over any of my books, because if you can capture that curious mind, you don't need anything else to drive forward in conversations with people.
I'll bet that was probably the only natural inclination I had that was a good fit for sales when I was an advisor. I think I've always been a naturally curious person, and I like people. I like talking to people.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. You mentioned specifically the schoolhouse. Now, I never served in the military, but I listened to a lot of podcasts of a lot of military veterans. My dad was in the Army 30 years, but I never served. I've heard guys refer to Camp Slappy. Is that Camp McCall that you referred to? Is that the same?
There could be that. It could be Camp Perry. Could be any of those places.
Was it survival school where they would encounter you in the interrogation?
The
Sears School.
The Sears School in Camp McCall was constructed and erected with the purpose of training high-risk personnel to deal with the capture and how to understand what will happen to them and to condition themselves to be able to survive in that environment. And they built that in 1986. And I was an interrogator at Alpha Company 519th MI Battalion at Fort Bragg, just adjoining to Camp McCall. And when they opened that up, brand new, I was one of the very first interrogator support folks in that facility as it was brand new, opened up in 1986.
So I'm guessing you must have seen a lot of, I'm just thinking of the types of people that get sent to that school, special operations folks, pilots.
Yes.
Who else goes to?
That preceded some of the other specialties that came along, but certain agency folks, lettered agency folks would come through. Okay,
the alphabet soup, 3-letter agencies.
So I got to see a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and they had the same mission, was to not talk to me about key information. They had to have a cover story. That cover story had to be good, had to be tight, because we would just take them at their very weakest point after they've been running through the woods for a week and not resting for a moment. And we were chasing them literally as part of the outfor. And they weren't eating well, drinking well, sleeping well. They lost weight. They lost, the drive it takes to resist. And then we put them in the facility, much like a POW camp that you've seen in the movies. Let's see, The Great Escape, such as that. And so then put them through some very, very personal, rigorous interrogations, and their story had to be solid. And sometimes it was, but pretty soon most of them break down because they don't think through all the ways to tell that story or to keep that story. They remember the story linear from beginning to end, but then when you try to get them to question from end to back to the beginning, it falls apart because they've never thought it that way. And so that was one of the most interesting times. Greg Hartley came and as a civilian worked in that facility for several years. And so it really is a necessary thing. It's unfortunate that we have to have that, but Nick Rowe, who this was patterned after from his 5 years in Vietnam as a captive, he was the keynote person. And I had lunch with Nick a year before he was killed in the Philippines. Up in Monterey, California, we had lunch together. It's my honor to have met him and to meet a lot of the people that make a difference.
Now, I have heard, and I don't remember where I heard this, but that supposedly everyone has a breaking point, that nobody could resist indefinitely. Is that sort of generally accepted truism?
Sure, why not? The thing about intelligence, information and intelligence, it's timely. And if I have information that could be on the battlefield, could only be of value 12, 24 hours, my resistance to that after 24, 36, 48 hours, if that comes out, it's already been bypassed, overcome by events in time. And so if I share some information that I know, maybe that keeps me in a more balanced relationship with a counter. So really, information isn't, it's perishable. And if you can give up some that's already perished, you haven't lost anything to the forces who are operational.
Interesting. So you were in the Army for 20 years. Was it all an interrogation?
Yes, as a matter of fact. And
Wow.
then another level of what they call debriefers. And that's the next level up when you take your basic interrogators and then make them a debriefer. That's a different questioning situation where it's with non-captives. And yet
Okay.
you have a different questioning situation. And one of my more popular or famous, I don't know how to say, students was a gentleman I talked to yesterday on the phone, Eric Maddox, and he and another Marine interrogator were the two responsible for finding Saddam Hussein in that little spider hole that he was hiding out in.
Oh, wow.
And to take him back into the conversation, he was atypical as far as an interrogator. He was atypical as far as a debriefer. He had to really work hard to meet the schoolhouse standards because he had his methodology that was very, very vital. But in the schoolhouse, it wasn't staying in the parameters. So we had to work with him to get him through the school, and from there he went and did the things he did, and with that he was able to do one of the key missions back in the Iraq War.
So I'm curious how different. I've kind of heard from different people that the stereotypical type of interrogations we see in TV shows and movies, the good cop, bad cop, and kind of very aggressive questioning, kind of physically trying to intimidate people. Mm-hmm. From what I've heard from some of the people like behavior panel guys and some others, that's not really the most effective way, in their experience anyway, to do interrogations. Has that been your experience?
Well, I will tell you that I watch everything that everybody else watches. Sometimes I cringe while I watch it because I say I would do it different, but mostly threat, anger, hostility, volume, those are theatrics, and those things come to the surface instead of go to the heart. And you've got to really get to the mind and the heart. And sometimes that's a soft voice. Sometimes it's just being quiet.
Yeah.
I can be quiet for a long time, and that's uncomfortable for people who need to talk. And so it's really the TV stereotypes and the movie stereotypes. Yeah, I think that there's a place for some of that, but for the most part, you've got to get to the heart. You've got to get to the mind. You've got to get to both of them at the same time. And the best interrogators not doing the theatrics as much as doing the listening, getting the baseline, getting the information, basic information, non-pertinent information, getting the discussion, opening it up, and then pull them to you, draw them to you. And you got something they need, which is hope. You got something they need, which is leaving this situation. You got something they need is the sustenance, food and water and comfort and sleep. And you can control a lot of that.
So you just made me think about one of the conferences that I went to years ago. One of the speakers was this guy named Chris Voss. Are you familiar with Chris Voss?
I'm getting familiar with him. Everybody talks about him. And just like I said before, a lot of my stuff is dusty, and I've got to come back up and get current. And the handles help me do that.
So the reason that I thought of him was that one of the interviews that I heard him in, he talked about how he was telling a story about this one particular hostage. He was a FBI hostage negotiator, and he taught the hostage negotiators in the FBI. He was telling the story of this particular hostage negotiation, and he was talking about the importance of listening. And he said on this one particular phone call, they had at one point 7 different people, FBI people, that were listening,
and each one of them had a specific assignment for listening. Like, I think one of the examples he gave was one of them was like counting negative words, and I don't remember the breakdown, but the point was, when I heard that, I thought, holy cow, 7 people listening. And his point was that there's so much that we miss when a typical person is listening. And I'm curious, when you did interrogations, was it typically just one-on-one, or did you have other support people that were in there listening for other things as well?
My experience is one-on-one, but a lot of times there's recording, there's observation from people, but mostly like I said, in the resistance laboratories, it's one-on-one, and that's a very sophisticated, current capability. Okay, we have cameras and have cameras on bodies. We have cameras that we can place, and we can hear and talk to everybody, and maybe one of those persons just listening to the breathing, maybe one of those persons just listening for the words, but you sometimes have to do that all by yourself.
Yeah.
That's why you the face and the body and the extremities it's got to be all in view, and you got to take advantage of watching that and listening for that. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's the ratio of conversation with me to you. I want to hear more than what I say, and that gives me more leads. That gives me more time to think and listen, to follow up, to redirect. I have the 2 books. One of them's all about questioning, the other is all about listening. And I realized after 20, 30 years of teaching questioning that maybe I know something about answering questions and listening to questions. And so I went to the other side of the mirror and addressed that as well. Which
one is more about listening than the other?
That would be the control the conversation.
Okay, good.
I don't like that book title. I never did. I wanted to say it's all about the answers, but I said, okay, you guys take care of the cover. I'll take care of the content. Me and Mary Ann Corench. She's a wonderful writer. She's written 35 books, 7 with Greg Hartley herself, 2 with me, and she's learned all that the human intelligence collection stuff through us and through others now. Guys who work for CIA and stuff. So she's really a composite of a lot of people, a lot of things, and she could stand alone and do what we do all by herself.
She sounds like she'd be a great person to interview.
I'll send her information to you, and absolutely, she's written some great books about some great things and great people.
Oh, that'd be great. So, one of the things that I have been working on that I'm sure I've heard it from a lot of different people, but I always used to think of empathy like I think most people think of it in. So I've heard psychologists delineate emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. And that guy, Chris Voss, he refers to cognitive empathy actually as tactical empathy when he talks about it, when he teaches stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he describes it is, when he's trying to negotiate with someone, especially like in that context of a terrorist, right, who's got a hostage, most people think about building rapport by trying to empathize with the other person, by trying to find something in common with them, right? Some kind of common ground. Mm-hmm. And he makes the point that I may not have any common ground with the terrorist, and I don't have the time sometimes I don't have the luxury of finding that common ground. And so what he looks for, the way he describes that tactical empathy, is getting enough information from them that you understand where they're coming from, and then being able to make it clear to them that you understand their position to the point where they say, that's right? Like, you get it, you understand me. Mm-hmm. And that's all he's looking for in terms of the empathy part of the equation. So in the context of not necessarily just interrogation, because I'd like to kind of broaden it out to, because it sounds like you're working with more than just people in an interrogation type setting and looking to do even more of that. So thinking in terms of like a business type of an interaction, what are some tips that you could give someone if they're just looking to quickly build rapport with someone, to be able to get a business conversation going what are some of the things that they could do that are sort of low-hanging fruit, if you will?
Well, I don't know if this applies exactly, but I had an interrogator friend who said he used to tell all his students to do two things. He said, watch Seinfeld and the Food Channel. And I said to myself, okay, tell me about that, because I've only watched one episode of Seinfeld, but most people understand what Seinfeld's about. So it's a lot of conversation about anything and really a lot about nothing. He says a lot of times you'll have conversations with people that have no meaning, no purpose, no direction. And so you have to get comfortable being able to have those kind of conversations that don't get anywhere, don't get any results, but you get comfortable having conversations. Some people aren't comfortable talking with people. And so the SEAL adage is you got to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I try to help people be comfortable with conversations. And sometimes introverted people are have trouble, starting a conversation and stuff. So I have a specialty with that I work them through, and I enjoy that, seeing that happen and seeing them come out and being comfortable coming out as introverts in that way. But then also the Food Channel. You mentioned, what do we have in common with terrorists? Absolutely nothing. You don't think as a terrorist. I don't think as a terrorist. We don't think that way. But one thing we do have in common with them, absolutely to the bottom line, is we all eat. And if we can't talk about anything else, we can talk about that. And that bottom line also comes to play with Saddam Hussein, because malgroof is a small carp-like fish that's his favorite snack to eat weekly, daily almost. And that fisherman in the little lake in Tikrit, and the messenger that came to him in the spider hole, all of that came together with Eric Maddox, and he said that conversation about food and different things helped him to find Saddam Hussein. But you have something in common with everybody, wherever you are. If you talk to people long enough, they know somebody you know or been somewhere you've been, and you talk about that and get comfortable with them, and you look for those connections. Really, that's as true as I can say. If I can talk to you long enough, John, we'll have people in common. We'll have places in common, and you'll be comfortable talking about it, and so will I.
Yeah, you touched on the hot button with my people being accountants who are predominantly, maybe not predominantly, a lot of them are introverts. So I did a training yesterday for a big company. I won't mention their name, but one of the questions that I asked, we were talking about being careful when making assumptions, right? And the platinum rule, right? Give people communication the way they want to receive it, not the way we'd like to receive it ourselves, or even the way we like to give it.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's helpful to understand some different frameworks, like introverts versus extroverts, right? And I asked a poll question, and it was actually almost split down the middle, introvert, extroverts. But a lot of the training that I do, that's one of my big challenges, is getting people, especially now that we're mostly virtual with our training, getting people out of their shells to start talking. And I know one of the keys is you got to ask questions, but do you have any particular types of questions that are particularly effective, especially with more introverted folks, to get them started?
Absolutely. And it has nothing to do with questions. We train a certain group of people down in Fort Bragg. And when we do MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs, it's not a personality test, but it's just a way of understanding people's energy and where they're at. Yep. And usually 60 or 70% of those people fall in that category of what we call introverts, which is really hard because their job is to talk to people. They can't do their job without talking to people. So I always make it a special point to say, okay, here's what I want you guys to do today at lunch after the very first day. I said, I want you to do a drive-by. And they said, what's that? I said, I want you to walk by somebody, read the data that they're giving you. Everybody's got data. They're wearing a Pittsburgh Steelers shirt, or they're wearing a Chicago Cubs hat, or they've got something about them that you can talk about besides saying, hello, how you doing? What do you think? So I'd say, okay, walk by somebody, You're not gonna have a conversation with them. You're just gonna say something about them. And so he's wearing a Pittsburgh Steelers shirt. I say, "How about those Steelers?" As I walk right on by. I didn't engage them in conversation. I didn't have to do anything other than just say something to them. That's a drive-by. Okay. Then the next day I do a hit and run where they stop and talk to them about something, and then they leave because they're more comfortable controlling that conversation. So they might say, I'm not from around here. There must be a good restaurant somewhere, and I'm looking for something good to eat. And they might direct them somewhere, and then thank you and move on. That's a hit and run. The next day, I'm going to ask them to do a ride along. If they're in the store and there's a line of people and checking out stuff, engage somebody in that group by saying something, and you got to stay with them for a little bit and see if you can have a little more conversation other beyond the initial contact. And so that's a ride along where they're with some people for a little bit and then they move on. And then eventually at the end, they're very comfortable when they have a pull over and park, have a conversation with somebody, and then drive away. Sometimes I say we might need to do a roadblock where you stop somebody, but I use that exercise to get them comfortable to do engaging everybody some way, somehow, every day, and getting them to come out, because normally they get in a line, they don't say a word. I'm in a line at the post office and I saw a lady come in with a big stack of presents at Christmas time. And I said, somebody has too many friends for Christmas. And she started talking about her daughter, that these are the last presents she's ever going to send to her daughter, and what was going on with that family. And we went through that whole line of everybody's looking and listening and amazed at what this lady talked about, just because I said, you've got too many friends for Christmas. So that was definitely a ride along that went a little crazy. There was a lady in the elevator. I talked to everybody in the elevator, and my daughters, they get uncomfortable, but I talked to everybody. But I was in an elevator with the lady who was in the corner of the elevator with their head down and her hands together. And I said, how do I get her to open up? And she had rings on every finger, and these were beautiful rings with lots of stones. And I just said, those diamonds are on fire. She opened up, she raised up, and she began to talk about those rings. And she said, if you have them, why don't you wear them? And this was from my husband before he passed away. And as she got out of the elevator, she's talking back to me as before the elevator doors closed. She's talking back to me. I never said another word. But all I did was take the data. There's something to talk about. And she was very closed up, and she just opened up. And so that's what I do with introverts. People will talk to you. You don't have to control the conversation. You don't have to direct the conversation. Just open up the conversation and go for the ride.
So that's a great set of exercises. So a drive-by, a hit and run, a ride along, and then a pullover and park.
Yes.
And what I love about that is you're kind of baby stepping them along.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You start them out kind of easy. I had a similar experience. I was in a grocery store, and the guy in front of me just had a party in his cart, just cases and cases of beer and ribs and barbecue sauce and bags and bags of chips. And I think I just said something like, well, I know where the party is now. And he just started, just like you're talking about, he just started talking, oh yeah, we're having family over, and telling me about the occasion, and this is his cousin, the DJ, and just on and on and on. And I just made that one comment, and I thought, I didn't think that much of it then, but I just thought, wow, that's just a really friendly guy. But I guess some of it is that, I guess it's kind of inadvertently the elicitation you were talking about, right? Mm-hmm. You're not asking a question, you're just making a statement, but it's getting that person to actually give you information.
Yes, and people will tell you things that you'll say, holy cow, wasn't the information I wanted, but it could be information I could use. Sometimes they'll give me exactly what I wanted. We have exercises in the past where we quit doing it, where people would give us their PIN numbers, unbeknownst to us, to them. And they were comfortable talking about things because we set a circumstance up that they were comfortable talking to us, and they didn't realize most folks don't realize how much you give away. And the bad guys and those work it just like the good guys. I kind of consider myself a good guy. They work it as well. So I'm teaching my daughters as best I can to be aware, to be looking, to be listening. There's teenage daughters in college now, and they're the last little rascals. No more after that. And but to listen and look, and I was in the elevator. We had done it at Virginia Beach, and we got out. I'd done some elicitation in the elevator for the 4 floors that we went from top to bottom. And I got out. My daughter says, "I saw what you did," and so they're observing and listening and learning, and I'm proud of them for that.
Have you ever had people comment? I may have mentioned this to you at the event, at the behavior panel event, that when I watch people who are really good at it, elicitation as well as some of the other skills, it looks like magic because I don't understand what they're doing, but then they'll explain it, right? Like the guys on the panel, they'll show a little clip and then they'll break down the behaviors that they're seeing and what their interpretations of what it means. And then they play it back. And the second time they play it back, I go, holy crap, this is like magic.
Yes.
Have you ever had people comment like that to you?
Well, yes, I've had people say, I'm not sure why I told you that. I'm not sure how we got there. And I might have been very sure how we got there. But like say the panel, I've learned so much. The last 2 years have been the most exciting learning times for me in years and years and years, just from the panel, just from those guys. And those guys had my book. Scott had my book. Chase, I didn't know Chase had my book until the live panel. He had it for years, and he took it with him on deployments because he said that helped him question well, and that was his job, part of his job. So that I was really did well for me to hear that, to know that, and then I said, okay, I need to do better and make a difference. Still,
he made a comment on the stage about you that really made me think I got to talk to this guy. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he said something, and the crowd they clapped, or they, real positive response, right? And then he said something about you, and he said, I said something the other day, and Jim gave me a pat on the back, and he goes, that pat on the back meant more to me than all you guys' applause. No offense to you guys, but I don't remember the story that he told behind it, but just that one thing that he said, that one pat on the back meant so much more to him. Mm-hmm. That made me think this guy's got to be a wealth of information, someone that I want to talk to.
Well, I thank you for reviewing that story, and absolutely the attention they put on me makes me want to be a better person, makes me want to do a better job, makes me want to talk to more people. And I always tell those guys, I want to grow up and be just like you guys someday.
But I'm trying to think of how to say this without sounding like a fanboy, but it's a privilege to be able to get some wisdom from someone that is, I mean, if you had to guess how many thousands of hours you had, honing your craft as an interrogator and all those different skills, I mean, I'm guessing it's well over 10,000, maybe 20,000. Who knows how many thousand, right?
I've never did a study on that, but sure, our life is full of. And we study sometimes at midnight, laying in bed.
So think about it this way. When I used to work in corporate America as a finance guy, when we did budgets, we always used 2,080 hours. That was the standard number of hours that we would put in the budget for every employee, right? Mm-hmm. That's the standard number of hours that body would be there working for the company. So just round 2,000 times 20 years, that's way more than your 10,000 hours. Oh, way more.
Sure.
So it's amazing to me sometimes how people can even get in conversations with someone and not realize what that person could bring to the table in a conversation if they, like that question you said, what do you know that I don't know that I wouldn't know if I didn't ask? There's that big blind spot that we all have about a lot of people. We have no idea what they bring to the table.
Sure.
And sometimes we don't even know the questions to ask.
Well, okay. Yeah, that's the thing about questions, is that you don't have to know the question to ask. If you're curious, the questions will come out. But I put together a formula for questions. It used to be, do we have a minute for talk about questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. When I was at Fort Huachuca, the Intelligence Center School for Interrogators, the course curriculum was 10 weeks. 1 week of that whole curriculum was given over to questions and questioning.
Wow.
And for that block of instruction, you didn't have to fight for that, because nobody wanted to do that week. It was 5 days a week, 40 hours for the week of 248 PowerPoint slides. Mind-numbing question after question in sequence and such, and follow up and blah, 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 blah. And it was a hard block of instruction to teach. So I took it, because my grandfather told me once, he said, you get the job nobody else wants, and you've got job security. And sure enough, I had it. And so I taught that block of instruction, and it was a hard block of instruction. And when I came out of the Army in 2004 and worked for Phoenix Consulting Group, we were tasked by DIA to set up a interrogation school, separate from the Army, separate from the Marine Corps, which were the only two interrogation schools for DOD, to set up a civilian-based interrogation school. I wrote the course for it, 10 weeks. The very first time we taught the course was out in a bunker on Coronado Island to the Navy SEALs. And we taught that course from Phoenix for 5 years total. And I took that block of instruction for questioning and said, we're not going to do this anymore. And I put together a 4-hour block of instruction that became the foundation for all questioning for our interrogation training. And I put together a formula. I'll write it out here and show you on the screen how simple it is. And it has been the foundation of everything I've ever done with questioning. And it's as simple as that. And if you can see that on the screen.
Yes. Where have I seen this before? I think it was the interview you did. I cheated a little bit. I did watch you on Eric Hunley's.
Yes. and that's the key to questioning that I've taught ever since. And it's so simple because, see, you were born an interrogator. When you were 2 years old, you were the best interrogator you're going to be for the rest of your life, because you were curious. You didn't have any biases. You just had a brain that needed information. And you would look at things, ask questions. As a 2-year-old, what's that? What's it do? Who's that? Where are we going? Why?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my favorite.
So that's the thing. You just need to be 2 years old again and ask simple questions. One interrogative with one verb and one noun, and that's a good question. And so the 2 is just being 2 years old again. And then 6 is the interrogatives. Who, what, where, when, how, and why. And the other one that everybody likes is, huh? That's another one.
Did I hear you say that was the one Marines use?
And then F is the easiest thing to train, hardest thing to learn. It's follow up. John, I'm going to ask you a question about yesterday. Okay, just to give you a frame. What'd you have for supper yesterday?
Yesterday I had fish with some zucchini noodles.
Okay, sounds good. What else do you have?
Water.
Okay, and zucchini, fish, noodles, and water. What else?
There was some sauce on it. Had some marinara sauce.
Okay, and still sounds good. I bet it was good. What else?
Yeah, it was good. I think that was it.
Okay, boom. That's where I'm at. Most people take the very first answer and say that was the answer. but there was more to it. Okay. And so it's follow-up is always, if you answer a question, you get an answer, ask that question again. Okay. Because nobody gives you the complete information as the answer. Okay. So that follow-up is it. What kind of weapons do you have? Well, I got guns. What are the kind of weapons you have? Well, guns and knives. I'm not going to ask you about what kind of guns, what kind of knives until I find out that you have no more weapons. What other kind of weapons you have? That's all. Okay, now I can question about guns, then I can question about knives and how many and what kind and stuff. But I don't question those things until I get the end state, which is that's all.
So if I had right away just said, that's it, and you said, what'd you have? And I said, fish and zucchini noodles. And you said, what else? And I said, that's it.
Then I've got to go with that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Or I might say, that's all? Oh, well, we did have dessert. As I think about it, we had a nice chocolate cake, but I'm looking to drive to that point where you tell me, well, no, that's it. Who were you with last night? Well, with my good wife. Who else? Well, we were at a house with some friends and they had some friends. And who else? Well, that's all. Okay. But I don't find out about all those friends. I don't find out all those people until I find out who all those people are, that this is only people I need to find out about. So that's the follow-up part of it. If I'm talking to, go ahead.
You're doing that for each one of the who, what, when, where, why, how.
That's part
one
of
at a time.
I'm question about. Yeah. Once, but I never start questioning it until I get all the information. I had a student who said that he asked the guy one time what he did. He said, well, I do this. He said, what else do you do? He said, well, I did this and that. And he finally ended up confessing to some other things because he thought the interrogator knew everything because he kept asking more and more, and he didn't, but it worked for him. If I'm talking to somebody who's planted IEDs, I want to know where they are. I want to know what kind of the target, but I don't want to know that yet. I want to know what else were you doing. I was doing some reconnaissance, and I want to know who it's for, what kind of reconnaissance, but not yet. And then say, what else are you doing? That's all. Now I've got the planning ID, and now I've got reconnaissance. Boom. Now I've got the two areas to dig into. But if I only went with the one, I'd miss the other because I followed the bouncing ball. I followed the shiny object. And so that follow-up's hard to teach. And then it's times 4. Okay. On this again, it's back to times 4 because there's only 4 things to talk about. People, places, things, and events in time. Everything's connected, but they only break out in those 4 areas. So if I talk about people, I'll still talk about places. I'll still talk about things. I'll still talk about events in time. Or if I talk about things, there'll still be people, there'll still be places, there'll still be events and times. But there's no more than that to talk about. And if you can take that formula of being curious, use good interrogatives for your questions, good follow-up in those 4 areas, you don't need to know all the questions. You just need to know what to talk about.
And then what was the last part?
Was the 4 areas: people, places, things, events, and time. And
okay. I thought there was something on the other.
Oh, that's the EEQ. That's effective, efficient questioning.
Okay, got it.
And that's what I'm working to try to find people. Maybe somebody on this broadcast that podcast, I should call it, I guess, accurately. And in your listening audience and your viewing audience, your viewers, maybe somebody knows where to direct me, because I believe the interrogation background I have and the 911 operators and dispatchers that work in that field, we have sometimes hours, days, weeks, and months and years to interrogate. They have seconds and minutes only. And they do the same job. They have to question where, who, what's happened, and where, and nothing about when and why. It doesn't matter. But those things have to be answered with people who are hysterical, people who maybe have a language barrier. English isn't their first language or only language that they speak at all. And so they have to really have a mission that's very similar to the interrogation mission. And I'd like to impact that. I'd like to help that, because some of them are just reading from scripts and it's not effective. It's not timely. It's not working well.
I need to connect you. One of my college fraternity brothers runs a 911 dispatch center in Miami.
I'd love to talk with him if you think we could connect, and I'd
Yeah.
like to do some things that might be helpful in that business.
Yeah, he's been doing that for years.
And I salute them. That they work 24/7, 365, and they're the people we never want to have to talk to. But if we do, they need to be the best they can be, and I'm sure he is too.
Wow, that's great. That's great. I'm a huge fan of frameworks for things to kind of help organize our thoughts, right? Because especially if you're someone like me who's easily distracted, when I've got some kind of a framework or a structure that I can kind of look to go step by step, that's super helpful for me. So I think that will be really, really helpful for other people as well. I want to take a look. I'd asked you before the podcast if there were any topics that you wanted to talk about. We've talked about some of them, the art of elicitation. We just talked about the effective, efficient questioning. It says here you're currently writing Body Talk animated.
Yes.
Is that a book that you're writing or a course?
It can be both. Certainly, in the book is where we're going first with Marianne and myself.
Okay.
We're taking, there's a world of body language books. Everybody at the panel has written their own, and multiples of that. And so I have nothing to add there, except that I can take an experience from my youth to my adulthood to redirect towards younger people how to learn the basics of body language, how to improve upon their understanding through animation. Everybody watches animated movies. Everybody watches cartoons. And who's the greatest body language presenters? Animators. They take a tow truck and make it a person. They take a donkey and give it human characteristics, and we believe it. Animation means to bring to life, and they bring these characters to life. They make them live in front of us, and we believe it because they breathe right, they react right, their emotions are right. And so animators are great body language people, and their product is really for entertainment. So I'm just taking their entertainment product, breaking it down through animation isolation, so that young people who watch movies just like you and I did, we were learning body language at age 4 and 5 and 6 at the movie theater watching cartoons.
Just not realizing it.
And so animators exaggerate body language. Animators exaggerate emotions, and makes it easy to learn. And so with that, I have two things that I do that I suggest. Is that you watch an animated movie, a quality movie, Pixar, Disney, that kind of thing, and then watch it again with no sound, none. Because then you're going to watch it as deaf people watch live, and they're the best body language readers on the planet. Not distracted by the dialogue, not distracted by the music that gives us a lot of pretense of what's coming up. And so we watch it for body language only because we can't hear anything else. And then when you're done with that, if you've got time, watch it again, but don't watch it. Listen to the movie, cover the screen, put on a blindfold, and listen, because who's the best listeners? The blind.
Blind people.
They have to listen well. And so with this isolation, you can take movies, animated, even regular movies, and a lot of times I will take political things or news things and do the same thing and see things
that's interesting.
with people's body language. And I think that the panel will tell you that they will do the same thing many times with the videos.
Yeah.
Greg Hartley tells me, and I don't think he'd mind me saying this, that sometimes he has to go through so many videos to determine which ones they're going to do for Thursday that he'll do them at high speed. And at high speed, you'll see body language changes quicker than waiting for them maybe through a 60-minute video. Run through it at high speed, and you'll see the body language changes. And then let's focus here, let's look here. And so there's things to be said. Movie producers will watch a movie backwards to see that it flows the same way backwards as it does forwards. And now that's an extreme. I don't suggest that, but that somehow, and So that's how deep you can go with this. But I'm taking the book, Body Language Anime, the Big Kid's Guide to the Body Language Basics, and then make it targeted for a younger audience, because I don't think anybody's addressed that audience exclusively. And I found nobody else has that title or that concept. So I may have a unique thing. I try to be unique. I invented a device for training use of interpreters with human intelligence collectors that was awarded a patent. As a matter of fact, that patent was unchallenged. It was uncontested as a standalone idea that nobody else had ever thought about. And that's pretty amazing to me. A kid who back when I was 10 years old, I stamped on a penny a page for a gentleman who invented a device for rebuilding bodies for cars. And he gave me a penny a page to stamp patent pending on each page, patent pending, patent pending. And I made, dollars and dollars as a kid. And I said to myself, maybe someday I'll invent something. And damned if I didn't.
Wow, that is pretty cool. So what exactly did the invention do?
It actually was inspired by Charlie Brown. And we hear the adults talking, womp, 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 womp. We hear them talking, we don't understand what they're saying. So instead of hiring linguists, you have to hire 2 linguists to train with an interpreter, one to be the source, one to be the interpreter, and you'd have to be in a foreign language other than the language of the individual being trained. And so that's a very costly proposition. Linguists don't come cheap, and you have to have 2 for each individual student learning. And if you have 15 students, you multiply that times the cost of travel, per diem, hotels and such. It's a horrible cost for business. And so I created this device. I used to be in radio, so I had an idea of how to use headphones and microphones and to create an artificial language, not a real language, but much like Babel, so that when I'm talking to you, you don't understand me. And when you're talking to me, I don't understand you. But we're all speaking English, and the interpreter speaks English. He understands you and talks to me in English. He understands me and talks to you in English. And that device then just creates an artificial language, real time. It's like a 1/5600th delay. You can't even see the delay, and yet you don't understand what I'm saying. So I created an artificial language barrier instead of creating language interpretation and translation. That's
fascinating.
It's crazy. It's easier to demonstrate with the machine than it is to talk about it. But I'm proud of that. And we sold a good many to folks in Little Creek, Virginia, some folks in Coronado, some folks down in Fort Bragg, to help them train, because what they do in interrogation is only complicated having to use an interpreter on top of that. And to do that job with an interpreter requires some training. So that helped out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one quick question I want to ask you before we wrap up, because I know we're a little over time here and I want to respect your time. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I run into a lot with most of the training that I do, and even a lot of the conversations like you and I are having now, are virtual. Are there any specific things any advice that you could offer to folks when they're dealing with conversations that are virtual that might be helpful? Because one of the challenges that I find, especially when I do my training, is a lot of times people won't turn their cameras on. They don't even have their microphones on. Sometimes they're just participating via text chat in the training. Any advice you could offer in those type of settings to help improve the communication back and forth?
It's my biggest challenge. When COVID came on, we still tried to do the same kind of training we've always done through this medium. It was the hardest thing for me to get to the end of the day and say I made a difference, because I couldn't hear your enthusiasm. I couldn't see but one dimension. That's what I said about the live panel. I said, we watched these guys on a flat screen and they just walked out in 3D when we were there with them. It became three-dimensional. And I'm a in-person contact kind of guy. I want to reach out and touch you on the shoulder and say, what do you think, friend? I want somebody to be able to do the same to me. Human touch is a great communicator without words. So we don't have that. I'm not digital savvy. I get befuddled with buttons and knobs and things that don't work, so that it's not my best medium. But I really think that there's things to learn and do. And the best is to just keep eye to eye, make sure the cameras are on, and engage everybody that's on the screen. If there's multiple people, pull them. Sometimes they won't jump in, but you got to pull them in, and that's part of the management of the training process.
One of the few things that I've implemented, I learned from Mark Bowden, which is I now have it's like a little pedestal that I have my camera on, so that my camera is closer to your face on the screen. So when I'm looking at you, my gaze is closer to the actual camera, because normally my camera is like up here.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at me, it looks like I'm looking down. Right. So I've tried to put it closer, and that requires me to make a compromise, because sometimes when I've got multiple people on, it's blocking their faces.
Yes.
So I can't actually see their expressions, but I try to remind myself I'm doing this for them so that they can feel more like I'm looking directly at them. So there's this trade-off.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like it just makes me want to just get people to, hey, let's all get in a room together like we used to.
Yes.
This virtual stuff, it's great when we don't have another option, but when we do, we should take it.
Yes.
We should be face to face.
I'm a human touch kind of guy, and so I felt like we've had nothing but a conversation here today. Okay.
Yeah, me too.
I've been very comfortable talking to you and answering questions and your elicitation, and I hope it's been the same. And for the viewers, I hope they see we're just talking, but we have things to talk about.
Yeah, my biggest hope for this podcast is that I am able to, I've done podcasts with other people and had a great time doing it. And so my biggest hope for this particular podcast is I could continue to have that same kind of fun myself with these conversations, but still provide values to people who are listening to and watching the conversations. So they're getting out of it as much as I'm getting out of it, because I'm kind of getting more fun and learning at the same time.
Yeah.
And I hope that comes across.
I'm very comfortable with what we've done here today. I had no notes in front of me. I don't have an agenda. I just said, okay, we're going to talk. We're going to discover. We're going to be curious, and that's what works for me. And you're a good host for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's a generous compliment. Thank you very much. Well, like I said, I want to go ahead and wrap up. I want to respect your time. I definitely have some follow-up stuff that I want to touch base with you on. You mentioned a couple of things that I just wanted to follow up on later on. We've got your information in terms of like where people can look for you. Your 2 books. Tell us the name of your 2 books again. You've got
Find Out Anything from Anybody Anytime, and Control the Conversation.
Yeah, and I've started Control the Conversation, and I'm glad that you said that's the one that's more about listening than it is about anything else, because I feel like that's my biggest area of opportunity for improvement.
Great.
Is getting to be a better listener. So, Jim, I thank you for your time.
And keep on doing what you do. And it's been a pleasure for me to share this time with you and your viewers.
Same here, Jim. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.